Welcome back to the deep dive. So this time we're going deep on the psychology of persuasion. You've shared some really fascinating excerpts from Robert Cialdini's influence,
Yeah.
and I'm really excited to explore how, our decisions are shaped by these, sometimes hidden forces. I gotta say, some of this stuff has already got me thinking twice about some of my own choices.
Well, you're definitely not alone there. Cialdini, he spent years studying what he called compliance professionals. These are the folks whose entire job revolves around getting others to say yes. We're talking salespeople, fundraisers, even think about some of our friends and family members.
Yeah.
And the fascinating thing is that these professionals, they use techniques that tap into these deeply rooted human tendencies. And the thing is, we all employ these tactics, often without even realizing it.
Wait, so you're saying I'm like a master persuader without even knowing it? That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So what's the first principle we should be aware of, so I can hone my skills?
Okay. Let's start with something Cialdini calls reciprocation, right? And the idea is simple. We feel obligated to return favors, gifts, invitations, you name it, right? It's such a fundamental part of human interaction. And Cialdini, he illustrates this with a story about Christmas cards sent to total strangers.
Really?
Yeah. A professor, he just sent out holiday cards to, people he had never met before.
Wow.
And the surprising part is that a huge number of those strangers, they actually sent cards back.
That's wild. But it also kind of makes sense, right? It's like that awkward moment when someone gives you an unexpected gift, and even if you don't really want it, you almost feel obligated to get them something in return. Is that kind of what's happening here?
Exactly. We're wired to want to even the score, to maintain a sense of balance in our social interactions. It's almost like there's this invisible ledger in our minds, right? And an uninvited favor, it creates a debt that we feel compelled to repay.
Mm-hmm.
And this drive is so strong that it even applies to unwanted favors, right?
Yeah.
Remember those address labels that charities often send? Oh, yeah.
Right. You didn't ask for them, but studies show that they can significantly increase donation rates.
Interesting. So those seemingly innocent address labels are actually a clever tactic to trigger our sense of obligation. Man, some of this stuff is starting to feel a little manipulative. Is there a way to use these principles ethically? Or are we all just doomed to be pawns in some elaborate persuasion game?
That's a great question, and I think it gets at the heart of Cialdini's work, right? The goal isn't to turn everyone into a master manipulator. It's about understanding these influences so we can both recognize when they're being used on us and to use them ethically ourselves.
Okay.
Right. So with reciprocation, the key is to focus on providing genuine value first.
Right.
Don't just give something with the expectation of immediate payback. Maybe share helpful advice or connect someone with a useful resource or simply offer a genuine compliment. When you lead with sincerity, the reciprocation that follows, it just feels much more authentic. Okay, I like that approach. It's about building genuine relationships, not just trying to score points on some imaginary scorecard. So what's the next principle we should be aware of on our journey to persuasion mastery?
Okay, let's move on to something Cialdini calls commitment and consistency.
Okay.
This principle, it highlights our deep-seated desire to be consistent with what we've already said or done, even when it's not necessarily in our best interest.
Oh, this one hits close to home. I can't tell you how many times I've declared that I'm going to start this new workout routine or stick to a budget only to fall right back into my old habits. Is that what you're talking about here?
Definitely.
Never.
We all have those moments, right? Cialdini, he actually uses a rather intriguing example from the world of toy marketing to illustrate this principle. Have you ever noticed how toy companies, they seem to magically understock those super popular toys right before the holidays?
Oh, absolutely. It's every year it's this frantic scavenger hunt to find the it toy. And I always end up settling for some second-rate substitute, promising my kids I'll track down the real deal later.
That's exactly what they're banking on. It's a brilliant, albeit slightly sneaky strategy, right? That plays right into this principle. By creating artificial scarcity, they essentially force parents to make a commitment by purchasing a substitute. Then, after the holiday frenzy dies down, they conveniently bring back the original toy, knowing those same parents will feel compelled to follow through on their promise to their kids.
Wow.
Right. Even if it means buying a second toy they may not have even needed in the first place.
Wow, that's devious. I never even considered that. I'm starting to realize how easily we fall for these tactics without even realizing it.
Right.
It's that old saying, Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice with like a cleverly orchestrated toy shortage. Well, you get the idea.
Exactly. And this principle, it applies to so many areas of our lives. Think about like public commitments, like New Year's resolutions. We're more likely to stick to them when others know about them because we want to appear consistent in our words and actions, right? So the key takeaway here is that once we've made a commitment, even a small one, we're psychologically primed to behave in ways that align with that commitment.
Yeah.
This can be a powerful force for good, right? It can help us stick to our goals and our values, but it can also be exploited, as that toy example demonstrates.
So it's all about being mindful of the commitments we make, right?
Yeah.
We need to make sure they're aligned with our like true desires and values,
Yeah,
not just driven by external pressures or clever marketing ploys.
exactly. Ethical influence, it involves encouraging commitments that genuinely benefit the person making them, right? Not just serving our own agenda. So be aware of this powerful principle, both in terms of your own choices and how others might be using it to nudge you in a particular direction.
Okay, that's great advice. I'm already feeling more like empowered to make more conscious decisions. Okay, ready for principle number 3.
Absolutely. This one is all about social proof. It's the idea that we look to others to decide what is correct behavior, especially in uncertain or ambiguous situations.
Okay, this one seems pretty intuitive. We all do it to some extent, right? Like checking the reviews before trying a new restaurant or like seeing what everyone else is wearing to a party.
Exactly. We're constantly taking cues from our social environment, right? Cialdini, he actually illustrates this principle with a rather chilling historical example. Have you heard of the murder of Catherine Genovese?
Vaguely. I know it was like something about a woman who was attacked and like no one came to help her. It's a pretty disturbing story.
Yeah, it is. What's particularly disturbing is that there were 38 witnesses who observed the attack but did nothing to intervene
Oh, wow.
because they assumed someone else would call the police. And so this tragic case, it highlights the dark side of social proof, right? When no one else is acting, it creates a false sense of normalcy,
Yeah.
right? Leading individuals to conclude that the situation must not be as serious as it appears. This phenomenon, it's known as the bystander effect, and it's driven by a diffusion of responsibility, where the presence of others actually reduces the likelihood of any single individual taking action.
That's terrifying. And it makes you realize how powerful this principle can be, especially in those like ambiguous situations where we're not sure what the right thing to do is.
Absolutely. And social proof, it's constantly at play, even in less dramatic situations, right? Think about those annoying laugh tracks on sitcoms.
Oh, yeah.
They might be cheesy, but they work because they exploit this principle. The laughter, it signals to us that something is funny, even if we don't actually find the joke that amusing on its own.
Yeah.
Right? So we're subtly swayed by the perceived reactions of others, even if those reactions are manufactured.
Okay, now I'm starting to feel like I'm being manipulated from all sides.
Yeah.
So how can I like avoid being misled by what might be like fake social proof?
That's a crucial question, especially, right, in today's world where we're constantly bombarded with information and opinions. It's more important than ever to develop a critical eye, right? Don't just blindly accept something as true or valid because it's popular or endorsed by a large group of people. Be skeptical, question your assumptions, and do your own research to, form your own informed opinions. Remember, just because everyone else is jumping on the bandwagon doesn't mean it's headed in the right direction.
That's a great reminder. I need to stop being such a sheep. Okay, ready for principle number 4.
Of course. This next one is all about liking. We're more likely to comply with requests from people we like, plain and simple.
All right, this one seems pretty straightforward. I mean, we all want to help out our friends and family, right? It's just human nature.
True, but Cialdini points out that liking and the influence it wields, it isn't just about deep personal connections, right? Even superficial factors like physical attractiveness, similarity, and compliments, they can trigger feelings of liking and make us more susceptible to persuasion.
Oh, you mean like that stereotypical car salesman who showers you with compliments and tries to act like your best friend, before hitting you with the hard sell?
Exactly. We all know those types.
Yeah.
And it seems we're inherently susceptible to that positive reinforcement, even when we know it might be strategically employed. So the key to resisting this kind of manipulation is to be aware of how quickly you warm up to someone, especially in situations where there's a clear agenda at play.
So I should be wary of anyone who's a little too eager to be my new best friend, especially if they're trying to sell me something in the process.
Precisely. Don't let charm and flattery cloud your judgment, right? Focus on the merits of the offer, not the personality of the person presenting it. Remember, you can be friendly and polite without letting your guard down completely.
Okay, I'm definitely going to keep that in mind the next time I step onto a car lot. So what's the next principle Cialdini uncovers in his exploration of persuasion?
This one's a biggie, authority. We are inherently inclined to, obey authority figures.
Yeah, this has been drilled into us since childhood, right? Like, respect your elders, don't talk back to the teacher. I mean, it's practically ingrained in our DNA.
Right, but Cialdini, he goes beyond the obvious, and he points out how, susceptible we are to the mere symbols of authority,
Yeah.
even if the authority itself is, questionable. It's like we're programmed to, respond to titles, uniforms, and other outward signs of expertise without always stopping to assess the validity of those claims.
Oh, I've totally seen this in action. It's like that time when, a guy in a lab coat, he walked into a hospital and, convinced nurses to administer eardrops rectally. Just the appearance of authority was enough to, override their common sense.
Yeah, that's a classic and somewhat alarming example.
Yeah.
It highlights how readily we, defer to perceived expertise, even when it contradicts our own knowledge or intuition. We see this all the time, from the way we respond to people in uniforms to, the influence of celebrity endorsements. The key to counteracting this automatic deference, is to ask yourself two crucial questions whenever you encounter an authority figure.
Okay, lay those questions on me. I'm ready to become a more discerning follower of authority.
All right, so first, ask yourself, is this authority truly an expert? Right? Don't just be swayed by, fancy titles or impressive credentials,
Right.
Dig a little deeper. What's their actual experience in this specific area? Do they have a proven track record of success? Are their claims, backed by evidence?
Right, just because someone calls themselves a guru or has a million followers on social media, it doesn't necessarily make them an expert in anything besides, self-promotion.
Precisely. The second question to ask is, how truthful can we expect this expert to be? In other words, what are their motivations? Are they presenting unbiased information, or do they have a vested interest in persuading you to think or act in a certain way?
Yeah.
And a genuine expert, they'll often acknowledge limitations or potential drawbacks, that adds a layer of authenticity to their claims.
That's a good point. It's like they're saying, look, I'm being upfront with you, even if it means highlighting some imperfections. That kind of honesty can actually make their positive claims more believable.
Exactly. So the next time you encounter an authority figure, remember to engage your critical thinking skills, respect their position, but don't automatically surrender your own judgment.
Solid advice. I'm starting to feel like I'm building a whole arsenal of mental defenses against these persuasive tactics. Okay, what's the final principle we need to be aware of?
This last one is all about scarcity. The basic idea is that we tend to value things that are scarce or difficult to obtain.
This one's pretty relatable. I mean, who doesn't love a limited edition
Yeah.
anything? It just feels more desirable, like you're part of some exclusive club.
Right. It's a powerful psychological lever, especially when combined with a sense of urgency. Cialdini, he cites the deadline tactic, a favorite among salespeople, where they create a sense of scarcity by emphasizing that an offer is only valid for a limited time.
Oh, I know that tactic all too well.
Yeah.
Limited time offer, act now. It's like a siren song for impulsive shoppers like me.
Right. But here's the thing. Scarcity doesn't always equal value. And that's where our critical thinking skills come in again. Just because something is scarce doesn't mean it's inherently better or more useful.
Yeah.
So, before you jump on that limited time offer, take a step back and ask yourself, do I genuinely want this? Or am I just reacting to the pressure of scarcity?
That's a great point. I'm definitely guilty of buying things I didn't really need just because they were about to disappear forever. I need to resist that fear of missing out impulse.
Exactly. Now, Cialdini, he doesn't just describe these principles, right? He also delves into the psychological mechanisms behind them, offering insights into why they're so effective.
I'm all ears. I love getting into the nitty-gritty of how our minds work.
Well, when it comes to scarcity, Cialdini, he highlights an intriguing nuance. Not only do we want what's scarce, but we want it even more when it's recently become scarce.
Oh, okay.
Right. Especially if we have to compete with others for it.
Ooh, you're talking about that frenzy that happens at a going at a business sale, right? When everyone's like grabbing for the same discounted item, it suddenly becomes a must-have, even if you wouldn't have given it a second glance a week ago.
Precisely. There's this psychological tug of war at play. We experience a sense of loss when something becomes less available.
Yeah.
And that loss aversion, it amplifies our desire for it.
It's like when your like favorite coffee shop suddenly closes down. You miss it even more than you realized you would. It's
Yeah.
like the principle of you don't know what you've got till it's gone in action.
Exactly. And Cialdini found that this principle, it even applies to information. We find information more persuasive when we think it's, like, exclusive or scarce.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like when you hear like a juicy piece of gossip and someone's like, don't tell anyone else.
Yep.
Suddenly you're bursting to tell everyone you know.
Exactly. The perceived scarcity of the information, it increases its value, and it makes us more likely to share it, even if we've been sworn to secrecy. To illustrate this, one of Cialdini's students, who was also a businessman, he conducted a fascinating experiment with his sales staff.
Okay.
They sold imported beef, and they called customers and offered it in one of three ways.
Okay.
Some got the standard sales pitch,
Yeah.
Some got the standard pitch, plus information that beef was likely to be scarce soon.
Okay.
And a third group got the standard pitch, the scarcity information, and they were told that this was exclusive inside information.
Okay. I'm picturing like a briefcase full of steaks and a whole lot of persuasive phone calls. What were the results?
The group that got the scarcity double whammy, the standard pitch, the scarcity information, and the exclusive tip, they bought twice as much beef as those who just got the standard sales pitch.
Wow, that's a pretty dramatic difference. It's like they weaponize scarcity.
Yeah.
So if I want to use this principle ethically, I guess the key is to be like transparent and honest about the scarcity. No manipulating people with like fake exclusive information just to, drive sales.
Exactly. Ethical influence, it involves respecting people's autonomy and giving them accurate information so they can make informed decisions. Now, we've talked a lot about how these principles can be used to persuade others, but what's really empowering is understanding how to defend ourselves against these tactics, especially, right, when they're not being used in our best interest.
That's a great point. As fascinating as all this is, I don't want to just be like a sitting duck for every like master persuader out there. So like, what are some strategies you can use to like resist these subtle influences?
Well, Cialdini, he argues that the first step is awareness. We need to recognize those click-whir moments, those automatic responses that are triggered by these persuasive tactics. Remember that analogy from the beginning?
Right. The mother turkey, like responding automatically to the cheep, cheep sound, even if it's coming from a stuffed polecat, right? It's like our brains are like wired to react in these predictable ways to certain stimuli, even if those reactions aren't always in our best interest.
Exactly. We all have these automatic responses, right? The key is to recognize when they're being triggered and to pause before reacting.
So like when I feel that surge of excitement at like a limited time offer, that's my cue to like take a breath and assess the situation.
Precisely. Use those feelings as a signal to engage your critical thinking skills. Why are you suddenly so interested? Is it the genuine value of the offer? Or is that scarcity pressure, like pushing your buttons? Ask yourself, would I still want this if it weren't scarce? Or am I liking this person more than I should, given the circumstances?
Those are such like simple questions, but they can make a world of difference in helping us like make more conscious decisions. It's like having a mental checklist to run through, before we click that buy now button or say yes to a request.
Right. Now, when it comes to dealing with the liking principle, Cialdini, he suggests a slightly different approach.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How do we handle those like overly charming individuals who are like experts at making us feel like we're best friends?
He suggests that instead of trying to prevent yourself from liking someone, you should simply be aware of when you're liking someone more than you should, given the context.
Okay.
Right. So that feeling of excessive liking, that should be your signal to like step back and reassess the situation.
So it's like a built-in alarm system. If my like meter is suddenly like redlining, that's my cue to proceed with caution.
Exactly. Focus on the facts, the logic of the situation, not the feelings that are being generated.
Don't let charm be the deciding factor. Okay, I'm starting to feel like I'm becoming a master persuader myself, or at least a master defender against unwanted persuasion.
That's the goal. Now, when it comes to authority figures, it's not about like questioning everything they say. Legitimate authorities, they play an important role in society. But as we've discussed, blind obedience can be dangerous. And Cialdini, he emphasizes the importance of questioning authority respectfully but firmly when necessary.
So it's about finding that balance between like respecting authority and maintaining our own like critical thinking skill.
Exactly. Now, what about the commitment and consistency principle? How do we avoid getting like trapped by our own words and actions?
I'm ready to break free from the chains of my past commitments.
Well, Cialdini suggests that the key is to listen to those subtle feelings of discomfort that arise when we're being pushed to honor a commitment that no longer feels right.
So like when you've agreed to like help a friend move, but then you find out it involves like driving a rickety van across 3 states in the middle of a heat wave and you're like starting to have second thoughts.
Precisely. Those feelings, they're trying to tell you something. Don't ignore them. It's okay to reevaluate a commitment and renegotiate the terms, or even back out entirely if, the situation has changed, or you realize you've overcommitted.
Yeah.
You have the right to change your mind, and a true friend will understand. Cialdini, he even shares a rather bold strategy he uses to counter this principle when it's being used against him.
Okay, I'm all for bold strategies. What does he do?
He says he simply tells the person exactly what they're doing. He calls them out on their attempt to use the consistency principle to manipulate him.
Oh, I bet that catches them off guard.
It does. He said it usually stops them in their tracks, and they either drop the request or back down completely.
That's awesome. I love the idea of like calling out these tactics, like mental jujitsu, or like using their own manipulative energy against them.
Exactly. Knowledge is power. And when you understand the principles of persuasion, you're less likely to be swayed by them against your will. You can make more conscious, deliberate choices that align with your own values and goals.
This has been incredibly insightful. I feel like I'm finally like seeing behind the curtain of everyday persuasion.
Yeah.
And it's both fascinating and empowering.
Yeah.
Now, before we wrap up our deep dive into Cialdini's work, there's one principle we haven't explored in depth yet.
You're right. We've covered reciprocation in passing, but it's worth circling back to this fundamental principle, as it plays such a significant role in shaping our social interactions.
Okay, let's revisit reciprocation. It's like that sense of obligation to repay a favor, right?
Yeah.
It's so deeply ingrained in how we like relate to each other, but I can also see how easily it can be exploited.
Absolutely. Cialdini, he offers some intriguing examples from, diverse realms that highlight just how potent and multifaceted this principle can be. He talks about the Hare Krishna Society and how they use reciprocation, sometimes in unconventional ways, to increase donations.
Oh, yeah. I remember them from when I was a kid. They used to be like a common sight at airports, like chanting and soliciting donations. I always found them a bit intimidating, to be honest.
Yeah, they were known for their very visible presence in public places back in the 70s.
Yeah.
But not everyone was receptive to their approach, right? And many people found them, intrusive.
Yeah.
So they decided to change tactics.
Did they tone it down?
Not exactly. They actually leaned into the power of reciprocation in a more subtle way. They started giving people small gifts, like a flower or a book before asking for a donation.
Yeah. That's interesting. It's like they figured out that a little bit of kindness could go a long way. I bet it was much harder for people to say no after receiving a gift, even if they didn't really want it.
Precisely. As Cialdini points out, we're wired to want to even the score, even when the initial exchange wasn't something we desired.
Yeah.
He also shares a more poignant example of the power of reciprocation, this time from the battlefield of World War I.
Okay, this I have to hear.
Yeah.
War and reciprocation. It's an interesting combination. What happened?
So this German soldier, he was on a mission to capture an enemy soldier for interrogation. And he snuck into the enemy trench and surprised a lone soldier who was eating. And the soldier was easily disarmed, but then he did something unexpected. He offered the German soldier some of his bread.
Wow, that's such a simple act of kindness. But in that situation, it's also incredibly courageous. What did the German soldier do?
He was so moved by this gesture that he couldn't bring himself to capture the enemy soldier. He abandoned his mission and returned empty-handed. The power of reciprocation, that innate human desire to repay a kindness, it transcended the orders he had been given and the conflict that he was engaged in.
That's an incredible story. It really highlights the human side of war and how even like small acts of generosity can have a profound impact, even in the most like challenging circumstances. So I guess the takeaway here is to like be mindful of those who might be using reciprocation tactics for their own gain, but also to like recognize its potential for good.
Absolutely. Reciprocation, it can be a powerful force for building relationships, fostering cooperation, and inspiring acts of kindness. But like all of these principles, it's essential to be aware of its influence and to use it consciously and ethically.
So like how do we defend ourselves against like unwanted reciprocation? It seems like such a powerful force.
Well, Cialdini, he suggests a surprisingly simple yet effective mental maneuver. He says we need to like redefine the situation.
Okay.
If someone does us a favor that we suspect is really a ploy to get us to comply with a later request, we should mentally reframe it not as a gift, but as a sales tactic.
Oh, so it's like that moment when like a salesperson is being overly friendly, offering you coffee and donuts, and you realize they're just buttering you up for the hard sell.
Exactly. By mentally redefining the situation, you free yourself from the obligation to reciprocate. You're acknowledging their strategy without falling prey to its influence. You know, you haven't accepted a favor, you've simply recognized a sales technique.
I love it. It's like mental jujitsu again. You're like redirecting their manipulative energy, turning it into a moment of like awareness and empowerment.
Precisely. And that's the beauty of understanding these principles. It gives you the tools to navigate the world of persuasion with, more confidence and discernment.
This has been an amazing journey. I feel like I've gained so much insight into the subtle forces that shape our decisions every day.
And remember, we've just scratched the surface. Cialdini's book, it delves into each of these principles in much greater depth, exploring the nuances, the research behind them, and the ethical considerations.
Well, you've definitely inspired me to read the whole book. It's clear that like understanding these principles can empower us to be more savvy consumers, more ethical influencers, and more conscious participants in the intricate dance of persuasion that is human interaction. This has been such a fascinating deep dive into like the psychology of persuasion. I feel like I've learned so much about like all the subtle ways that we're all being influenced, like literally all the time.
It really is amazing, isn't it? And the key takeaway here is that this knowledge, it's actually empowering. By understanding these principles, we can become more conscious of our own choices and more discerning when it comes to like all the influences around us.
You've definitely given me a lot to think about. I feel like I need to like go back and like analyze every interaction I've ever had. But in all seriousness, is there like one final piece of advice you would give our listeners to like help them navigate this like complex world of persuasion?
I would say this. Stay curious, keep questioning your assumptions, and don't be afraid to push back against influences that, just don't feel right. Remember those click-whir moments and use them as opportunities to like pause, reflect, and make choices that are truly aligned with your own values and goals.
It's such great advice. It's like a reminder that we always have a choice. We're not, just mindless robots responding to like external stimuli. We actually have the power to decide how we want to be influenced.
Exactly. And that's what makes this also fascinating. We're all engaged in this intricate dance of persuasion, whether we realize it or not, but by understanding the steps, we can become more graceful, more skillful, and ultimately more in control of our own destiny.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive, and I can't thank you enough for like sharing your expertise with us.
It's been my pleasure. I always enjoy exploring these ideas, and I hope our listeners have found it valuable as well.
I'm sure they have. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. And remember, stay curious, stay critical, and stay true to yourself.
See you next time.